What if the place you're supposed to feel safest is the one that knows your deepest fears? What if it isn't you choosing the place, but the place choosing you? Nathan and Emily had been searching for a break from their exhausting lives, and the remote cabin by the lake seemed like the perfect escape. Surrounded by dense trees and the mirror-like surface of the water, the silence was almost unsettling. But it wasn't long before the peaceful isolation turned suffocating. The moment Nathan stepped through the door, a cold shiver ran down his spine, a feeling he couldn't quite explain. There was something wrong about this place. It wasn't the creaking floorboards or the damp, musty air. It was as if the cabin was waiting for him, like it had been expecting his arrival. Nathan's hands trembled slightly as he unpacked his bags, the sensation of being watched gnawing at him. It was subtle at first, a shadow moving in the corner of his eye, a faint sound just outside the window, like footsteps crunching leaves in the darkness. Each time he turned to look, there was nothing. But the feeling grew stronger, impossible to ignore. Something was here with them. Have you ever felt like you weren't alone, even when you should be? Like something was watching you from the shadows? Nathan tried to shake it off, telling himself it was just the stress of the city playing tricks on his mind. But deep down, he knew this was no ordinary cabin. He couldn't help but wonder, had someone else been here before them? Had they felt the same dread slowly creeping in? He glanced at Emily, who seemed oblivious, smiling as she lit the fireplace. But even her laughter felt out of place, almost hollow in the thick, oppressive air. If you're as captivated by this mystery as we are, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. Trust me, this story only gets darker from here, and you won't want to miss what happens next. That first night in the cabin, Nathan's sleep was restless. The heavy silence of the woods pressed against the walls like a living thing, suffocating him in the darkness. He drifted off, but soon found himself standing at the edge of the lake in a dream so vivid, it felt like he was awake. The fog was thick, swirling over the surface of the water, and the air was bitterly cold. He could hear the soft lap of the water against the shore, but there was something else. A faint, eerie whisper carried on the wind. It was like the voices were coming from the lake itself, beckoning him closer. Nathan's heart pounded as he took a hesitant step forward, the damp earth squelching under his boots. His breath hung in the air like a ghostly mist, and every instinct screamed for him to turn back. But he couldn't. His feet moved on their own, pulling him toward the water. The whispering grew louder, clearer, as if multiple voices were calling his name in unison. Suddenly, out of the corner of his eye, he saw a figure standing on the opposite shore. It was tall, motionless, and shrouded in shadow. The figure's presence sent a chill through Nathan's entire body, but he couldn't tear his gaze away. The air smelled of wet wood and something else. Something rancid, like decaying leaves mixed with the stench of something long dead. His skin prickled as the figure slowly lifted its arm, pointing directly at him. The fog thickened, swirling faster, and the voices were no longer whispers. They were screams. In an instant, Nathan was awake, gasping for breath, his body drenched in cold sweat. But the moment his eyes opened, a realization hit him like a punch in the gut. The screams, they hadn't stopped. The sound was faint now, barely audible, but it was real. Somewhere outside the cabin, in the woods, someone, or something, was screaming. He lay still, trying to convince himself it was just the remnants of his dream clinging to his mind. But the dread clutched at his chest, refusing to let go. He glanced at the window, half expecting to see the shadowy figure staring back at him. The glass reflected nothing but the dark outline of the trees and the faint glimmer of the lake in the distance. Was it just a nightmare? Or had something crossed over from the dream into reality? He didn't know, but the terror gnawed at him, sinking deeper with every passing second. The cabin, once a sanctuary, now felt like a prison. Something had followed him from the dream, something that wouldn't leave until it had him. The following day, the eerie sense of dread refused to leave Nathan. The dream from the previous night haunted his thoughts, but he tried to shake it off, convincing himself it was just stress from the city or the unfamiliarity of the cabin. As he and Emily sat by the lake that afternoon, a strange silence settled over the area. The birds, which had been chirping earlier, were now eerily quiet, and the usual sounds of nature seemed to fade into nothingness. Nathan's eyes kept drifting back to the spot where he had seen the shadowy figure in his dream. There was nothing there now, just the still water and the thick trees looming like sentinels. Yet, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching them, lurking just out of sight. That night, as darkness fell, the atmosphere inside the cabin shifted again. The air felt thick and heavy, almost oppressive, as if the walls themselves were closing in. Nathan could hear the faintest creaks and groans coming from the wood, but they sounded too deliberate, too rhythmic, to be natural. It was as if someone, or something, was walking just out of view, moving slowly through the cabin. He tried to focus on the fire burning in the hearth, but the flickering shadows cast by the flames seemed to dance unnaturally across the walls. Each movement felt wrong, as though the shadows were alive, twisting and contorting into shapes that didn't belong. Later that night, as Nathan lay in bed, sleep eluded him. He couldn't ignore the sensation of eyes upon him, watching, waiting. The quiet was deafening, broken only by the occasional crackle of the dying fire. Suddenly, a noise, a soft knock, echoed through the room. It was faint, barely noticeable, but unmistakable. Nathan's pulse quickened. The knock came again, louder this time. It was coming from the window. His body tensed as he forced himself to turn his head, eyes locking onto the glass. There, just beyond the pane, he saw it, a faint outline of a figure standing in the darkness, motionless. It was the same figure from his dream, the same shadow that had haunted him by the lake. But now, it was real, right outside. Emily stirred beside him, but Nathan didn't dare wake her. His heart pounded in his chest as the figure slowly raised a hand and pressed it against the glass. The handprint left behind was wet, dripping with something dark, something that looked like water, or worse, blood. The figure's face remained hidden in shadow, but Nathan could feel its gaze penetrating him. And then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure vanished into the night, leaving behind the handprint smeared across the window. Nathan sat frozen, paralyzed by fear. What was happening? Was this cabin truly haunted, or was his mind unraveling under the weight of something far more sinister? The line between dream and reality had blurred, and Nathan could no longer tell what was real. As he stared at the handprint on the glass, he felt the same gnawing fear return. The cabin was no longer just a building. It was alive, breathing, watching, and waiting. Whatever it wasn't done with him yet. That night, sleep came for Nathan like a thief, dragging him into an abyss of terror. He couldn't escape. In the dream, he found himself standing by the lake again. But this time, everything was different. The air was thick with the stench of decay, the fog swirling around him, like fingers reaching out to pull him in. The water, once still and reflective, now bubbled and churned as though something was lurking just beneath the surface. The whispers were louder now, not from the wind but from the water itself. Voices of the damned calling to him, begging for release. Nathan's heart raced as he scanned the shoreline, desperate to find some escape, but there was no way out. The trees seemed to close in around him, forming a dark wall of twisted branches that blocked any retreat. His breath came in ragged gasps. His legs felt heavy, almost as if the ground beneath him was pulling him down. And then he saw it again, that same shadowy figure, standing at the edge of the lake. But this time, it was closer, much closer. Its face was no longer obscured. The figure was human, or at least, it had been once. Its skin was pale, stretched tight, over bones that jutted out, unnaturally. Hollow eyes stared back at Nathan, dark pits of nothingness, and its mouth hung open in a silent scream. Nathan tried to move, but his body refused to obey. He was frozen in place, rooted to the spot as the figure began to move toward him, its steps slow, deliberate, each one causing the earth beneath him to quake. The closer it got, the colder the air became, until every breath he took felt like shards of ice stabbing into his lungs. The figure reached out, its hand skeletal and dripping with dark, murky water, and before Nathan could react, it grasped his wrist. A jolt of pain shot through his arm as the figure's grip tightened, its icy fingers burning into his skin. The whispers became screams, not from the lake this time, but from inside his own head. Suddenly, the ground beneath Nathan gave way, and he was falling, plunging into the icy depths of the lake. The water closed over him, dark and suffocating, pulling him down into the abyss. He thrashed and kicked, trying to reach the surface, but the more he struggled, the deeper he sank. The figure was still there, its face inches from his, grinning now, its empty eyes watching as Nathan fought for his life. His lungs burned, his vision blurred, and just as he was about to give in, a sharp jolt ripped him from the dream, and he gasped awake, his body drenched in cold sweat. But something was wrong. The weight of the dream still hung heavy on him, and as Nathan sat up, his heart nearly stopped. The bed was wet. The sheets were soaked, as if they had been submerged in water. His clothes clung to his skin, dripping with the same dark, murky liquid from the lake. But it wasn't just the bed. The entire floor of the cabin was slick with water, and there, on the wooden planks, were wet footprints, leading from the window to the foot of his bed. Nathan's breath caught in his throat as he followed the trail with his eyes, his heart pounding in his chest. The prints weren't his. The realization hit him like a sledgehammer. Something had been inside the cabin while he slept. The figure from his dream had crossed the boundary between nightmare and reality, leaving behind a tangible, terrifying mark. His mind raced, trying to make sense of it all. But the more he thought, the more impossible it seemed. Was it real? Or was he still dreaming? He reached for Emily, but she was gone. Panic surged through him as he leapt from the bed, the cold water sloshing beneath his feet. He ran to the window, but the outside was swallowed by the same thick fog from his dreams, obscuring everything beyond the glass. And then, just as he feared, he saw it again. A single wet handprint on the window, smeared across the glass, just like before. The terror was no longer confined to his sleep. It was here, with him, in the waking world. Nathan's hands trembled as he wiped the cold sweat from his forehead, staring at the wet handprint on the window. The line between his dreams and reality had blurred beyond recognition. But this was no hallucination. The water on the floor, the soaked bed, the footprints, they were all real. And worse, Emily was gone. He called out her name, but the only response was the echo of his own voice bouncing off the cabin's walls. Panic gripped his chest as he bolted through the cabin, searching every room, every corner. But Emily had vanished without a trace. Desperation gnawed at him. He needed answers. Determined to find out what was happening, Nathan stumbled upon an old wooden chest hidden under the bed. It was covered in dust, clearly untouched for years, and he felt an odd sense of dread as he lifted the heavy lid. Inside were faded photographs, newspaper clippings, and a journal, all yellowed with age. As he flipped through the pages of the journal, a cold wave of realization washed over him. The journal belonged to a couple who had rented the cabin years before, just like him and Emily, but their stay had ended in tragedy. According to the entries, they too had experienced strange visions and dreams, just as Nathan had. One passage stood out. "We saw them, those figures by the lake, trapped in the fog. They whispered to us, called for us to join them. But now they've crossed over. They're here in the cabin, and they won't let us leave." The final entry was smeared and barely legible, written in frantic handwriting. "It's too late. The lake has claimed us. It will claim anyone who stays too long. We are part of it now, forever lost in its waters." Nathan's blood ran cold as he connected the dots. This wasn't just a nightmare. It was a curse. The cabin was a trap, a lure for the unsuspecting, and those who stayed long enough became part of its dark legacy. The visions of the shadowy figures, the lake, the handprints, it all pointed to the same conclusion. The people in his dreams weren't figments of his imagination. They were real, and they had once stood in his place, living, breathing victims of the cabin's grip. Now they were lost, trapped between this world and the next, desperate to pull others into their eternal suffering. Suddenly, a memory flashed in Nathan's mind, something from his past that he had long buried. Years ago, as a child, he had visited a lake just like this one with his family. His father had told him stories about spirits trapped in the water, unable to move on. At the time, Nathan had laughed it off as a silly ghost story, but now it was all too real. He had been here before, or at least somewhere eerily similar. This cabin, this lake, had been waiting for him. It wasn't just chance that brought him here. It was fate, drawing him back to a place he was never meant to leave. The realization hit him like a freight train. What if I've been marked since childhood? The cabin's curse had reached out across time, pulling him back to where it all began. And now, Emily was caught in the same web. He had to find her before it was too late. Nathan's breathing quickened as he grabbed the journal and the old photos, desperate for any clue that might help him break the curse. The more he read, the more the pieces of the puzzle fell into place. The disappearances, the visions, the lake's hold over its victims, it all pointed to one horrifying conclusion. The spirits trapped in the lake were calling for new souls to take their place, to release them from their endless torment. And Nathan and Emily were next. Nathan's mind raced as he pieced together the horrifying truth. The cabin and the lake weren't just haunted. They were a gateway, a trap for the lost souls who ventured too close. Emily was somewhere out there, caught in this nightmare, and if he didn't act soon, she'd be lost forever. Desperation gripped him as he grabbed a flashlight and bolted out of the cabin into the cold night. The fog had thickened, swirling like a living entity, hiding whatever terrors lurked beyond. The once serene lake now felt like a dark abyss, waiting to claim another victim. As Nathan trudged through the dense fog, the air felt heavier, colder with every step. His breath came out in short, visible puffs, and the forest around him was deadly silent. Not a single sound, no animals, no wind, just the eerie quiet that gnawed at his nerves. He could feel eyes on him, though he saw no one. The feeling was unmistakable, like a predator waiting in the shadows, watching his every move. Every crunch of leaves beneath his feet seemed unnaturally loud in the stillness, his heart pounding in his chest, echoing in his ears. Suddenly, a movement in the fog caught his eye. A figure, pale, ghostly, stood just ahead. His heart leaped as he recognized Emily's silhouette. "Emily!" he called out, rushing forward. But as he approached, his hope turned to dread. Emily stood motionless, her back to him, her body unnaturally still. The closer Nathan got, the more he realized something was terribly wrong. Her clothes were soaked, her hair dripping as if she had just emerged from the lake. But it wasn't water that coated her skin. It was the same dark, murky substance from his nightmares. Nathan's steps faltered, his voice caught in his throat as Emily slowly turned to face him. Her eyes, once full of life, were now empty, void of any recognition or warmth. Her lips moved, but the voice that came out wasn't hers. It was a low, raspy whisper, layered with the voices of many others, all speaking at once. "We've been waiting for you." The fog swirled around her, thickening, and Nathan felt the temperature drop drastically. It was as if the ground itself had frozen beneath his feet. Nathan's mind screamed at him to run, but his body refused to move. Emily, or whatever she had become, took a step closer, her hand reaching out to him. His heart pounded in his chest as he stumbled backward, desperate to escape her grasp. "Emily, please, it's me," he shouted. But deep down, he knew it was too late. This wasn't Emily anymore. The lake had taken her, just like it had taken so many before. And now it wanted him too. In his frantic search for answers, Nathan remembered the journal. He needed help, someone who knew more about the lake's dark history. With trembling hands, he pulled out his phone and dialed the number of the local historian he had spoken to earlier in his research. The line crackled, and after what felt like an eternity, the voice on the other end picked up. "You found the journal, didn't you?" The historian's voice was grave, as if expecting Nathan's call. "Whatever you do, don't go near the water. The lake, it's not what it seems." Nathan's breath hitched as the historian's words confirmed his worst fears. The people who had vanished near the lake were still there, but not in the way anyone would imagine. They were part of it now, trapped between life and death, their souls bound to the water, forever cursed to lure others into their fate. The only way to break the cycle, the historian warned, was to sever the connection between the lake and its victims. But no one had ever succeeded. "They won't let her go without a fight," the historian whispered. "And if you're not careful, they'll take you too." Nathan's hand tightened around the flashlight as he glanced back at Emily's figure, now dissolving into the fog. Time was running out and he had to act fast. The historian had mentioned an old ritual, something that might sever the lake's hold, but it required a dangerous sacrifice. Nathan's mind raced with the weight of what lay ahead. The path before him was dark and fraught with terror. But he couldn't abandon Emily. Not when she was so close, yet so far beyond his reach. With renewed determination, Nathan ventured deeper into the fog, his heart heavy with the knowledge that he was walking straight into the jaws of whatever evil lurked in the depths of the lake. The spirits would not give up their claim easily, and Nathan knew that to save Emily, he would have to face the same darkness that had taken her. But with every step he took, the whispering voices grew louder, more insistent, as if the lake itself was calling him home. Nathan's heart raced as he descended deeper into the fog, the cabin now a distant memory, swallowed by the eerie gloom. The path ahead twisted and turned, growing darker with each step, the air thick with the weight of unseen eyes watching him. The historian's words echoed in his mind. They won't let her go without a fight. But Nathan was prepared to fight. Emily's life depended on it, and he would not leave without her. As he neared the edge of the lake, the ground beneath him felt unstable, as though the very earth was shifting, rejecting his presence. The lake lay before him, shrouded in a mist so dense it seemed alive, twisting and curling like tendrils reaching out for him. In the center, something began to stir. At first, it was just ripples, soft and gentle, but soon the water started to churn violently, as if something massive was rising from its depths. Nathan's breath caught in his throat as a dark shape slowly emerged from the lake, tall, twisted, and monstrous. It was the figure from his dreams, but now it stood before him in full terrifying reality. Its skin was stretched thin over bones, eyes hollow and glowing with an unnatural light. The figure's mouth hung open, but the voice that spoke wasn't human. It was a chorus of whispers, the same voices that had haunted Nathan's sleep, all speaking at once. "You cannot save her. She is ours." Nathan's pulse pounded in his ears as he stepped forward, clutching the ritual items the historian had told him to gather. His hand trembled as he held out the bundle of herbs and the old weathered knife. The ritual was supposed to sever the lake's grip, but the historian had warned him there would be a cost. The water began to rise around him, soaking through his boots as the dark figure loomed closer. Nathan's eyes darted around the shoreline, searching desperately for any sign of Emily. The fog swirled violently, but there, through the mist, he saw her, standing at the water's edge, her body swaying like a marionette, controlled by an unseen force. "Emily!" Nathan shouted, his voice cracking with emotion. She turned slowly, her eyes empty, her expression vacant. She was there, but she wasn't herself, just a hollow shell of the woman he once loved. The figure behind her loomed closer, its skeletal hand reaching toward her, pulling her back toward the lake's depths. Nathan felt his chest tighten as the realization hit him. The lake didn't just want Emily, it wanted him too. It had lured him here, into its trap, and now it was trying to claim them both. With shaking hands, Nathan began the ritual, chanting the ancient words the historian had provided. The air grew colder, the water around him now rising to his knees, pulling at his legs as if the lake itself was trying to drag him under. The figure's eyes blazed with fury as it hissed, its voice echoing inside Nathan's head. You cannot escape. You are already part of us." As Nathan spoke the final words of the ritual, the ground beneath him trembled violently, and a sharp crack split the air. The figure screamed, a deafening wail that shook the trees and sent ripples across the water. For a moment, Nathan thought it had worked. The fog began to lift, the water receding slightly, and Emily took a small, hesitant step toward him. But then, the figure lunged, its skeletal hand slashing through the air. The blade Nathan held slipped from his grasp, sinking into the water, and in that moment, the lake's grip tightened once more. The realization hit Nathan like a cold wave. There had been a price all along. The ritual demanded a life, a sacrifice to break the lake's curse. It wasn't enough to sever the connection. Someone had to take the place of the lost souls. And in that instant, Nathan knew what he had to do. Without hesitation, Nathan turned to face the figure, his heart pounding with fear, but resolute in his decision. "Take me," he whispered, his voice trembling. "Let her go. Take me instead." The figure's hollow eyes flickered with recognition, and for a brief moment, the whispers ceased. The lake grew still, as though it was considering his offer. Then, with a sudden violent surge, the water rose up, engulfing Nathan in its icy grip. He felt the cold rush of the lake pulling him down, dragging him beneath the surface. As the darkness closed in around him, his last thought was of Emily. Her face, her voice, the life they had shared. He hoped, prayed, that she would be free. The figure's eyes were the last thing he saw before the water swallowed him whole, its grip tightening like chains around his body, pulling him deeper and deeper into the abyss. But then, as quickly as it had begun, the lake grew calm. The fog lifted completely, revealing the shore once more. Emily collapsed to her knees at the water's edge, gasping for breath, her eyes wide with shock. She was free, but Nathan was gone. The lake, it seemed, had claimed its sacrifice. The final whisper echoed across the still water, a voice both haunting and final. One must always remain. The lake had gone silent, the fog completely dissipated, and the night seemed almost peaceful, too peaceful. Emily sat by the water's edge, trembling, her mind reeling from the events that had just unfolded. The wind was still, and the once turbulent waters were calm, reflecting the pale moonlight like a glassy mirror. But that silence was deceptive. The cabin, the lake, and the woods, none of it felt right anymore. Nathan was gone, swallowed by the same darkness that had taken so many before him. Yet, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't entirely lost. Somewhere beneath the surface, in the murky depths of the lake, she felt his presence lingering, trapped but not forgotten. Emily's breath came in shallow gasps as she stood up, her body weak and unsteady. She cast one final glance at the water, half expecting to see Nathan's face looking back at her from the depths, but the lake remained still, its secrets hidden beneath the black surface. She turned toward the cabin, but a sharp sound, a faint ripple, barely audible, made her freeze in place. Slowly, she turned back to the lake, her eyes narrowing in fear. There, in the middle of the water, something broke the surface. It wasn't a figure, but a ripple. Gentle at first, but steadily growing stronger. Her pulse quickened as she realized the lake wasn't done. The curse had been passed on, and though Nathan had sacrificed himself, the lake's hunger for souls would never be satisfied. It always demanded more. The words from the journal echoed in her mind. One must always remain. Nathan had freed her, but at what cost? The lake had claimed him, and now it waited for its next victim. The quiet whispers returned, faint but insistent, as if calling her back, urging her to stay. The temptation to go back, to dive into the water and reach for Nathan, was overwhelming. She took a step toward the lake but stopped herself, fear overtaking her longing. Was that really Nathan beneath the surface? Or was it just the lake playing its cruel tricks? She couldn't be sure. The mist that had lifted began to creep back, swirling around the lake like a slow, tightening noose. The cycle was starting again. Emily backed away, her legs shaky, her heart pounding in her chest. She had to leave, to escape before the lake claimed her too. But as she stumbled toward the path leading out of the woods, she couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was watching her. The wind picked up, carrying with it the faintest echo of Nathan's voice. "Emily?" The sound was distant but unmistakable. She spun around, eyes wide, searching the shadows, but there was nothing. Only the endless dark water staring back at her. Emily's thoughts raced. Had she really escaped? Or was this all part of the lake's twisted game? The questions gnawed at her, leaving her on the brink of madness. She could feel the pull of the lake, the same eerie force that had drawn Nathan in. The curse wasn't just about the lake claiming its victims. It was about leaving them haunted, forever bound to its dark influence. As Emily reached the edge of the woods, she paused, casting one last look at the cabin and the lake beyond. The place felt timeless, as though it existed outside of reality, forever cursed to repeat the same horror over and over. She knew deep down that even if she left, the lake would follow her in some way. The darkness had already marked her. She hesitated, her mind torn between fleeing and staying, between abandoning Nathan to his fate and trying to save him. But the truth was, Nathan was beyond saving. He was part of the lake now, part of its endless cycle of torment, and the same fate awaited anyone who dared to stay. But what if... Emily whispered to herself, her voice trembling with doubt. Could there still be a way to break the curse for good? Or would the lake forever haunt her, pulling her back into its icy grasp? As the screen fades to black, the last shot lingers on the lake, now calm and still, but carrying the weight of untold horrors beneath its surface. The silence is deafening, broken only by the soft rustling of leaves in the wind and the faintest whisper that carries across the water. What do you think? Is the curse truly broken, or is Emily still bound to the lake's dark grip? Could there be more to this story that we've yet to uncover?